really need to define our journeys and our ways we like to work and need to work in order to observe protocols and proper respect and reciprocity and all that. We need to do that, not just with some body like the city. Like this, the work that we're going to talk about, or the things we're going to talk about today, are going to also help us formulate a way to talk about those things in other situations.
Since 2013 and the City of Reconciliation work, and then that whacking whack of money that came with Canada 150 plus, it feels like there's a big imperative to reach out to Indigenous artists and communities, whether it's useful to them or not, whether they're ready or not, whether it supports their communities' health and well-being and culture or not. And many of the Indigenous artists I talk to are wiped out from writing grants, buried in bureaucracy. Who is it that you work for again? So what's actually useful in this work? Figuring out what's actually useful in this work from the perspective of Indigenous artists and cultural producers, and how that can't not be connected to community.
I think about my relationship with the art I do, which is music, and that has been my connection to culture for a long time. So what I don't think people realize is that our communities are what initially supported us. My opportunities as a performer, the first time that I got paid, was doing community events within our own community. That there's this whole set of stages and a whole different world that the mainstream music industry doesn't want to understand or care to understand. So I'm working on bridging that gap.
Being able to connect to Indigenous community kind of as soon as you get to a new space, I don't know, it's really healthy.
More Indigenous students in our program. I learned the most from my students, so that was a hope of mine. Access, making meaningful change in our systems, taking the government to tasks and get them to act upon the fact that they have adopted the TRC calls to action and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And Nadine was saying Articles 11 and 31 are really great, and we should all read them.
To kind of make it an intergenerational attendance, so that we see, different generations coming together to attend workshops. So I think that would be really good to see more of that in the city.
Interesting is a lot of people don't feel that they can go, like with the Skwachays powwow, it just was. A lot of people still have a feeling it's not, if I'm not First Nations, I can't go. No. It's not, it's on the reserve, I won't be welcome. And that's not true, but it's a perception that unless someone actually comes and invites you and says, hey, it's cool, come with me, I want you to experience these songs, and that and you will be welcome, and please buy stuff. That is the difference. It takes a person like an ambassador to bring people in, and sometimes that's the difference maker.
The term decolonization or decolonized, still grappling with that. But again, it's taken hundreds of years to get to where we are. So just, we also wanted to give ourselves space to recognize that it's a heavy word, and we don't really know what it means, or at least we in our group too acknowledge that we don't necessarily know what the term decolonized means.
Working and getting grants and funding, it is hard to get funding to keep programs going. Like it's a year-to-year basis. So sometimes in 1 year we get a grant to do some really amazing stuff, but the next year we don't. So
I don't know. Like, I feel like the structures thing is a tough question because I kind of have to create my own structures.
But I think that, you know, that there could be a lot of events happening, art and music and that sort of thing. But I know that for many, a venue is always a cost, and access to these places sometimes are difficult. I know that in the organization I work for, we try to put on a fundraiser, and half our profits go to space. So it would be nice to have places where you know that you can get them at a better, lower cost for free.
An investment into our community, with our community working alongside them. It's still those non-native people making those having those power relationships where they have all the power, and they'll choose the Indians that they want to work with and the ideas they want to work with, and they won't be thorough necessarily because it's all about their idea and getting that, you know, their creative idea out there.
The lack of Indigenous dancers that are training in our contemporary dance institutions, and just the presence of Indigenous values and content in programming in Vancouver.
But I'm Cree Métis and I'm displaced. So how, you know, that's a barrier.
Protocols around inclusion. It was definitely commented that a lot of our obstacles or puzzles are institutional in nature, so policies and structures that don't support this work.
But I think it's a beneficial aspect of creativity to even arrive at that place where we question what we're doing, and there we begin to find out what we can do. What we cannot do is, of course, is on a very personal level. So I think that don't be afraid. Just go ahead, and then when you get there, ask questions.
Whoa, whoa.
Really see the value in these gatherings and bringing people together, and I can also sense the frustration and barriers that people who've been doing this work for a long time are coming up against. Just like, you know, is this ever going to really get into people's heads that this is like reconciliation, and these ways people want to move forward are not just words and not just photo opportunities, but they're actual actions and how you engage with people and carry out what it is you're doing. So
the knowledge is here within our community. Like, we have the skill, and so many people are totally willing to share their time and materials and ideas. But I found that space is like a really tough one to find that's accessible as well.
Yeah. I like a lot of the stuff around Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights, because I think often people aren't credited, like especially like knowledge holders. Like if somebody was to give somebody permission for a song, you can't just credit that person, you know, that gave you permission for the song. You have to credit the person who the song belongs to, you know. And I think it's really important and necessary that we spell things out like that, because people just won't do it, you know, without, you know, people don't have that knowledge to kind of navigate that. But also, if we don't spell things out like that, people just won't. And I think that there's an importance of having some sort of board or committee or something that can also in turn sort of make sure that these things are enacted.
These missing pieces within all of our organizations, us included, that don't completely connect, right? We don't build that bridge to those communities. And I think you have to have a value that you want to connect to those communities. And I think that's why I kind of we're all here in this room, and I'm going to rally that there's that value of having that connection to those communities.
We want it Indigenous led. We want a mechanism in there where there's communications so that we're being respectful and mindful of the Indigenous community, and that we're really representing the diverse Indigenous community. And that's the other thing that's problematic, is that they don't recognize that Indigenous diversity in the city.
As an organization, build bridges between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, because we're all working in both worlds.
We should think about is protocols also for other Indigenous artists, because Indigenous artists might be working with either, like often you would know things in your community, but you might not know things from another community. So I think it's important to have some, it's probably good to have some guidelines that, clue other Indigenous artists who might not know,
And one thing that we're always critiquing is, have they worked in collaboration if they're doing Indigenous themed projects? Have they worked in collaboration with an Indigenous person, Indigenous artist, and then probably, gone through some sort of like a content committee with local First Nation. So I think that'd be a good kind of collaboration protocol, and I think they must have it. I mean, I remember the talk they did here at Skwachays, but it's just something always to kind of remember. Like, if there's something coming up, to flag it. Like, this is appropriation. Are you working or prepared to work with somebody that's First Nation? We're not going to squash you right away, but you can't do this project unless you collaborate. And then just to avoid all appropriation.
And that we push for an Indigenous department or office to hire Indigenous people to work with the Indigenous community and to work with City Hall staff.
It came down again to that word relationship. So, first you had to have a values shift, or at least the presence of truth and reconciliatory values. And then you would engage with Indigenous artists based on those values, right? If those values are in place, that would sort of occur. So there was multiple, examples of our organizations having collaborations or things like that, and instilling appreciation, and also having some of the tools and resources like a roster or a database, or at least knowledge of who were the Indigenous artists in your area.
And having tea, or going to a number of events, so you get to know the community. It would look like, so that when you invite them in, you invite them to offer their ideas, not just your ideas. That's what it would look like. So some of what we're talking about is defining those. What does respect look like? What does relationality look like? It looks like this. When I'm presenting a work in your community, this is what I hope for. I hope there'll be Indigenous people in the community. Have you ever had any people in your community in the theater before? Oh, no. Well, then here's some ideas about what that might look like and how long it might take for you to get there.